Hello, good evening and welcome again to Changing World Conversations with these in Glasgow later on. Now, this is, my name is Susan Morrison, by the way, and this is an extraordinarily interesting event that we're having this evening. It's about rethinking travel for a healthier future. I'm joined by three fantastic panellists. I've got Dr. Will Cawthorn, lecturer at the Centre for Cardiovascular Science, Dr. Mark Miller, research fellow at the Centre for Cardiovascular Science again, and Professor Nanette Mutrie. Am I saying that right? Mutrie? Yep. Nanette Mutrie, Professor of Physical Activity for Health. And as we were actually discussing that, could there be physical activity that's not for health?
Yeah, some physical activity might not be healthy.
What physical activity might not be healthy?
Working down a mine.
Ah, good point. Working down a mine. Excellent.
But we're going to ban coal, so that'll be fine.
We're going to ban coal, so that's okay, so we don't have to worry about that in a minute. Excellent. But let's go straight into this, by the way. If you have any questions, put them into the chat box function in YouTube. Fire them in. I'll put them to the panellists. And let's talk about living and working and moving and travelling for a healthier future. So, of course, the biggest thing, I suppose the one thing that if you're talking about physical activity is travelling, is the car. Mm-hmm. Is it the baddie that everybody says it is?
Well, I think all three of us are going to try and persuade you to get. I think people became aware that it's damaging all these different things. And actually, if you look at the early deaths that are due to air pollution, actually most of the deaths that are linked to air pollution are actually people dying of cardiovascular disease or dying of a heart attack or a stroke. But air pollution is a complicated thing. There's many, many different substances in air pollution. And there's many, like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different chemicals. And a lot of these have the capacity to be harmful to health. But when you try and focus down, the thing that appears to be the most harmful to health is the particles in air pollution. So these are the very, very tiny particles that you can't see by the eye, but they're there in our environment. And of course, particles can come from lots of different sources. They're made of different substances. And the different sizes. Size is important, I should say. Size is important because that's how we measure particles in our air pollution. So we have networks of monitors around our environment, and these all measure particulate air pollution by something called PM10 and PM2.5. That's what you hear in the newspapers. And really that's what we're trying to tackle. We're trying to lower these. But actually there's particles that are even smaller than that. So they're actually particles that are called ultrafine particles or nanoparticles. And these are so small that they're even smaller than just a virus, for example. Oh. And we think it's these particles that are the most harmful to health. And when we're talking about these sort of particles in the environment that we live in, one of the major sources that we're exposed to is vehicle exhaust. So that's where the cars come in. And diesel exhaust cars with diesel engines have exhaust that has many, many more of these nanoparticles in the air. So this is where we started our research. We wanted to ask the question, do diesel exhaust particles, do they harm health? Do they damage our heart and our blood vessels? So we did this. We assembled a team of scientists, and this was led by a very talented cardiovascular scientist, cardiologist called Professor David Newby. And with support from the British Heart Foundation, we actually collaborated with scientists in different countries. So we worked with scientists in Sweden and the Netherlands. And the reason for this is they have these specialised facilities where you can actually have exposures to specific pollutants, like diesel exhaust, for example. And I hope we've got a video coming up here where you'll be able to see some of these facilities in action. So the facility itself is an idling diesel engine, and what we asked people to do would to actually sit in a chamber, cycling away while breathing in diesel exhaust. Now, I know that seems really quite drastic, and before anyone calls the police, what we should mention is that this is all done very safely, it's all done with very tight ethics, and it's all done by trained engineers and trained clinicians. And perhaps what you've seen just earlier in the video there is that when people are in this chamber, this box doesn't fill with black smoke. It's actually the diesel exhaust that goes into it is diluted down with clean air, and it can be set to whatever levels we want to study. So most of the experiments that we did, we wanted to try and say, well, what happens if people exposed to diesel exhaust as if they had cycled in very, very heavy traffic for a couple of hours? And that's what we did. And what we found really surprised us. We were expecting to see some effects, and probably not good ones, but we were staggered to see there was many, many different effects, many very harmful effects, all across the cardiovascular system. So if we take our heart, for example, it changed the rhythm of the heart. It made the heart more susceptible to damage. So if you have a blocked artery and the blood can't circulate around the heart, the damage is much greater. It damaged the blood vessels, and it made the blood vessels sort of stiffer and less responsive, less able to control the flow of blood around the body. And it also made the blood more likely to clot. It thickened it. And then all these things together, these are the sort of things that are going to cause problems for you. So even if you're a very healthy person, if you're exposed to diesel exhaust, for example, and you have these effects and they occur across the whole life, of course, of your body, that's going to make you more likely to develop heart disease.
So, in other words, even if you're a super healthy jogger and you're jogging through a polluted street, it's not a good idea. You're breathing this stuff in all the time.
Well, that's true to some extent, because if you're jogging away and you're fitter than me, you're actually breathing faster because you're doing some work, and that does mean that you breathe in more air pollutants. And I think Nanette and Will are going to tell you later, actually the benefits of the exercise probably outweigh the pollution.
So diesel. I mean, the big shock was, of course, but some of us bought diesel vehicles thinking we were doing the right thing, not looking at anyone in particular, but still smarts. And then we discovered we weren't. So diesel's bad. Lead was very bad. We took that out. So we managed to cut down the pollutants. So I thought things were getting better, but you're telling me that they're not.
Well, they are getting better to some extent. So as I said, everyone sort of measures air pollution and particles in the environment by PM10 and PM2.5, and that's coming down. It's come down quite steadily over the last 30 years. It's perhaps levelling off a little bit, but it's coming down there. I think what we tend to overlook is there might be other air pollutants that we're not sort of measuring in an environment like diesel exhaust.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because we're not going to be having cars that are spewing out pollutants anymore. We'll be moving to something nice and smooth and sweet and silent. Electric cars, won't we?
Well, that's true. That's certainly true. And I do think electric cars are part of the puzzle. So if you look at the exhaust, well, you don't have pollutants coming out of the exhaust of an electric car. What you do have, though, is they still generate air pollution because particles come from their wheels and the tyres and the brakes and the road dust. And these do make particles. And I think what scientists are trying to work out now is how harmful are these types of particles. And we don't have a good feel as if they're as harmful, for example, as diesel exhaust.
You see, I've got a thing about electric vehicles. There's two things I've got about electric vehicles. Have you been in an electric taxi? So for the first time, you can actually hear what the taxi driver is saying, and that's a bit of a shocker. But the thing about an electric vehicle is that you have to plug it in. So you have to get the fuel, you have to get the power from somewhere. So basically, isn't the electric vehicle just as dangerous as the petrol vehicle, because we still have to generate the electricity, and there's charging points everywhere.
Well, that's true. You do have to generate the electricity, but things are changing. We don't have to, for example, generate it with big coal plants. You know, we can start doing this environmentally friendly ways to generate the electricity to power our cars.
And the batteries, what do you make the batteries out of? I mean, because an ordinary battery has to be disposed of carefully. I'm told, I never do it though.
Well, that's a great question. And you do hear lithium come up, talk about, so the lithium, most batteries in electric cars are made of lithium, and that's a rare earth metal, and people have to mine areas to get this. Actually, but though the technology is starting to change, it's actually improving a lot. And to that end, I spoke to a colleague who's Professor Nanette Mutrie at Edinburgh Napier University, and he's a specialist in the area. So I asked him, you know, how is the technology changing the outlook of electric vehicles? And I think we have his response to show you.
Sustainability is vitally important. The electricity for charging cars can come from renewable sources. And in some countries, large-scale solar farms have been built for the prime purpose of charging electric vehicles, with the excess power being fed into the grid. In the past 15 years, the price of solar PV modules has dropped from £7 to less than £0.50 per watt. Engineers are also designing cars with their own solar panels, which are fitted on the roof and bonnet of the car. These panels can efficiently run the air conditioning system of the car. The availability of rare earth materials like lithium is a concern, but new batteries are being developed using sodium, magnesium, and aluminium. And these new batteries can be up to 3 times more efficient. The environmental revolution is underway right now.
Well, there we go. I should say incidentally, it's not that I don't recycle my batteries. What happens is I just put them very carefully into a box to recycle them and then just forget all about them at the back of the cupboard.
Keep them there for a while.
Just keep them there, actually. They become mementos after a while. So there we go. It's all been solved. We'll just get electric cars. Well, brilliant. Hey, we don't have to worry.
Easy. Yeah, so unfortunately it's not quite that simple. Even if we're still driving cars, even if they're electric cars, that's encouraging us to be sedentary and sitting down.
Right.
And so then that's an incentive against taking more active forms of transport, such as walking and cycling, which has its own health benefits. So a real goal that we need is to sit less and to move more.
Right.
So why do I care about that? It's really driven by my research into obesity and interventions that we can have to improve our body's metabolic health. So that's important. If you look since 1975, the prevalence of obesity around the world has almost tripled. So now there's nearly 2 billion adults who are overweight or obese around the world. And the problem there is that obesity is increasing the risk of diseases like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, and it's a major contributor to increased risk of early death. So there's really an urgent need, given that there's more obesity, to understand how is obesity leading to these other health complications, and what sorts of interventions can we design to prevent obesity or to treat it. So that's sort of a focus of my research. And I think if we're going to do that, you have to first understand what is obesity. And most of us would say, well, that's obvious if someone's carrying more fat than they should. And that is the definition. It's excessive accumulation of fat in the body. So one way that we can visualize and understand that is through a technique called magnetic resonance imaging, or an MRI scan. Here you can see MRI scans from one normal weight and one obese person. With this type of scan, the fat deposits show up as these very bright white regions. Most fat isn't just floating freely around our bodies, it's stored in a specialized tissue called adipose tissue. These green arrows are pointing at adipose tissue that's stored beneath the skin, which is what we call subcutaneous adipose tissue. But as shown by these red arrows, we also store adipose tissue abdominally around organs such as the liver and the pancreas. What you can see here is that an obese person has greater amounts of this subcutaneous adipose tissue, but they also usually have more in these abdominal regions. My research focuses on how adipose tissue impacts our health. And something that we now understand is that it's not just how much fat our bodies are storing, but where it is stored. Having excess abdominal adipose tissue is associated with a greater risk of diseases such as diabetes and heart disease. So this obese person with greater abdominal fat is at greater risk than this normal weight individual. Now, what's quite interesting is that even if you don't appear obese on the outside, you can still have high amounts of abdominal fat. So here we have a normal weight person, but they've got more intra-abdominal fat than this healthy normal weight individual, and in fact a similar amount as this obese person. So this puts this normal weight but high abdominal fat individual at a higher risk of health complications. What this highlights is the importance of being able to store fat safely, what we might call our fat storage capacity. And one way to think of this is by picturing a bath filling with water. Here, the size of the bath represents our capacity to store fat safely. If we eat more food, more energy coming in, and or burn less energy, for example through less physical activity, then the bath will fill up, will become fatter. Whereas if you eat less food, but burn more energy, then the bath will empty, you'll lose fat. In a non-obese person, the bath is not too full because the energy intake is balanced by energy expenditure, so the bath does not fill up. But in an obese person, particularly one who has developed health complications, the bath has become over full. They've exceeded their fat storage capacity, and so the fat, represented here by the water, is now spilling over into places where it shouldn't be, such as into your liver, your pancreas, or being stored within your heart. And this is a key reason why obesity leads to diseases such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease. This excessive fat storage occurs when energy intake exceeds energy expenditure over a long period of time. But what about someone who's not obese, but who has high amounts of abdominal fat? This person might be consuming and burning calories at a similar rate to this non-obese, healthy individual, but this person has a smaller bath. Their fat storage capacity is lower, and so fat spillover into other organs, flowing out of the bath, occurs more easily, leading to higher abdominal fat and an increased risk of obesity-related diseases. Together, what this shows is the importance of adipose tissue for safe energy storage and the need to balance energy intake with energy expenditure if we're to ensure that we don't exceed the capacity of our adipose tissue to store fat safely.
Right.
You get all that?
Okay. How do I know how big my bathtub is?
Well, you could have an MRI scan, it might tell you something. We're learning more about that from large-scale genetic studies, and you can find genes that might make you more likely to have diabetes, for example. What we're finding is a lot of those genes are probably related to our ability for safe fat storage. But so maybe one day there'll be a genetic test that could tell you, oh, this is your profile, here's your risk, etc. But we don't sadly have those at the moment.
Right. So if you could, so quite a lot of people that we call obesity, there could be a genetic driver in there?
There's definitely a genetic driver for obesity. I think in society at large, we sort of stigmatize obesity and think it's a matter of being weak-willed. But actually, the risk of becoming obese is about 70% heritable. They know that through twin studies and things like that. So it's a bit of a genetic lottery.
But we kind of live in a society that has so much food to hand.
Exactly.
This is a driver.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so the big challenge then, okay, we each have an individual capacity to store fat safely. That's probably genetically ingrained. Maybe we can develop drugs that will enhance that to decouple obesity from these risks. But really what we're looking at is interventions to either promote activity or to decrease food intake. So what a lot of my lab does is looks at what we'd call caloric restriction, essentially going on a diet, decreasing the amount of food that's consumed, and then looking at the health benefits. And we find interesting things such as the effects differ between males and females and depending on how old you are. But I think if dieting were easy, everyone would do it, and obesity wouldn't be a problem. So it'd be fine, but it's not easy. So that's why it's also important to have tools to promote physical activity. And that's why thinking about moving towards more active transport is important for promoting physical activity and therefore having these metabolic and cardiovascular benefits.
You know, strangely, I know that you're all wonderful scientists and all the rest of it, but I can tell you from my own research, dieting is not easy.
No.
Okay, no, let me tell you here and now, there are many pairs of jeans in my wardrobe that will tell you dieting is not easy. So it seems to be a combination of cutting down how much you eat and getting physical. I'm beginning to think, I'm getting out of the car, I'm beginning to think that the Flintstones had the right idea. Do you remember the car that they could run along? I think, perfect. Exactly. So it's about physical activity. But is it about physical activity, Nanette?
It is. It's about
Get out
physical
there.
activity. Yeah, the less we're in our cars and the more we make any journey a bit active, maybe not the whole journey, but some of that journey active, we have a plus for our health and a plus for the planet. And I'll come back to that. But a lot of people think of the active travel thing as cycling only.
Yeah.
You know, that's sort of stuck in our head, and cycling lobbies have great power to tell us about this. Cities have adopted cycling schemes, and that's fantastic. And I'm a commuting cyclist too, so I love it. But walking will be the form of active travel for most people to be able to do. 80% of active travelling is a little bit of journey to the bus stop, a journey to the train station, even a journey from where you've parked your car. If you get some walking into that, and you do that before you're going to the shops, after you've been to the shops, to work, home from work, to the school run, to your social events, you stack up a lot of activity quite easily without having to put in the effort of getting to the gym. Indeed, I saw a funny thing the other day on Twitter where they were saying how strange it would be to drive to a gym to walk on a treadmill when you could just have walked. And if cities were a little bit more friendly about walking and cycling, we would get our activity much more naturally.
We've both done that.
Well, better that you're doing the activity at all than not at all. So, yeah, active travel means walking for most people, cycling for some people, wheeling. We have to be inclusive. So people who use wheelchairs, they can be active as well, powering themselves with their arms in their wheelchairs. But skateboarding, little scooters, they're all forms of active travel. And that gives you very good physical activity. And as Will has been saying, we've got lots of evidence now that regular activity prevents and treats many of the common diseases, cardiovascular disease, some cancers, diabetes, obesity. But actually one of our bits of research from the Physical Activity for Health Research Centre is about mental health benefits of walking in particular. And I think we've got a wee image to show you here from a scoping review that we recently did and published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. So over to the left, it's telling us that this edition of the British Journal of Sports Medicine was 21 years after a very seminal paper published that told us the health benefits of walking. So over 20 years ago, people weren't really convinced that walking could provide health benefits, but this paper showed it. And so this edition followed up 21 years later to say, well, funnily enough, all that time ago, we hardly talked about mental health benefits of walking. But in the interim period, we know lots about that now. There's been lots of research looking at how walking benefits people's mental health. So right in the middle, the strongest evidence is that walking can both prevent and treat depression and anxiety. The strongest evidence for depression itself. But I mean, that's the magic of physical activity. Prevent and treat a thing. There's not very many of our natural behaviours can really help us in that direction. So that's strong evidence right there. And then going to the thumbs up symbol, we can see that walking actually now has evidence that it improves more positive mental health benefits, like actually feeling happy, being in a good mood, increasing your self-esteem. And on to the right, we get a double bonus, because if you're walking in the natural environment, in Scotland, there's plenty of that to offer, where there's green trees, rivers, water around about us. There's an additional benefit we know from being in that environment itself. So walking has enormous benefit for mental health, and that might be the thing that helps people do more. We've certainly felt in the pandemic that we've talked a lot more about mental health challenges, and something as simple for people as getting out and walking for 10 minutes in short bouts, it doesn't need to be a lengthy piece of walking, can bring those benefits very quickly. And that brings me right to what we're talking about in terms of the COP26 and Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations created 17 Sustainable Development Goals for nations to try and adopt to create more sustainable cities and nations, and frankly, a better world for us all to live in. So we've got this next image up here, which actually comes from the International Society of Physical Activity for Health. So the pie chart shows all 17 of them. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to talk about them all. But our society has shown that 8 of them can have substantial contribution from physical activity, therefore creating a more sustainable and better world for us. And of course, right in the centre is what we've been talking about. Number 3 is being regularly active creates good physical, mental, social health benefits, indeed promotes well-being. And that's one of the key sustainable development goals for nations to seek. And then I'll just speak about 3 others. If we go to the left, number 13 is about climate action. It's exactly what we're talking about. So this active travel idea, if you can reduce any of the journeys that you make by car, make some of them even by public transport, you will always get activity into that. If you make your journey all walking, all cycling, all wheeling, you will get health benefits from that. Less emissions for cars, less fuel use, less pollution, less congestion, better for the climate. And then number 11, we've got some experience of this about sustainable cities and infrastructure. The pandemic created that need for cities to make cycling and walking safer for people. So we've had all these pop-up lanes, we've had street closures, people pedestrianising areas, you know, and 10% of Transport Scotland's budget this year is going towards active travel to help that approach. And we've seen other cities. Paris has decided to stop parking in the centre of Paris. And it's very keen on the 15-minute neighbourhood. It's trying to create little places where you don't need to go more than 15 minutes to get to all your local needs, like schools and shops, doctors, dentists, etc. So people are taking this action for a sustainable city, which involves being more active. And then finally, the one I'd like to bring out is number 10, about equity. So walking as an example, there's very little difference between the percentage of people in Scotland who walk regularly between men and women, or between the richest and the poorest, or between age groups. Now, that's not true of other sports. There's often a difference between men and women. There's often a difference between the richest and the poorest. There's often a difference between age groups about the number of people who can participate in sports. So walking is a very equitous mode of activity. So active travel, particularly walking, contributes to that sustainable development goal. So what I'm trying to say is getting some of your travelling to be active is good for our health, but actually it's good for our planet.
Excellent. So just one or two things there, Nanette, if you don't mind me, because you said the thing about Paris.
Yeah.
And
you don't like Paris?
I'm sure it's marvellous. It's just that the French are notably cantankerous, and apparently there were protests because whenever you do anything in Paris, you wind up with farmers with tractors up your Champs-Élysées, and that can be a right mess. And so that it was quite interesting that the neighbourhoods themselves kicked back. They didn't like it, and I was wondering if it's because they hadn't been consulted properly.
Well, maybe is consultation, but around the world, many cities have adopted this kind of more pedestrian-friendly approach because shopkeepers love it. There's this actually footfall going past their shops and better economic
I get that,
activity in their community as well.
And walking is great. And first of all, I love the idea of walking as a sport because I'm a really aggressive walker. It's like, you know, I'm going to pass that person. Right.
How aggressive?
Yeah, I'm pretty aggressive because I'm quite short and, you know, I get quite angry and I don't walk very fast. And I've got very short legs, so I have to walk twice as fast as anybody else to get anywhere.
You do more steps then than someone else. Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's very good for my health then because I've been in a constant state of rage. There are people who are so wedded to their cars. We'll come back to the French in a minute and give them out. There's some people who are so wedded to their cars that they would park in the frozen food aisle of Marks and Spencer's, and we can't seem to get them out. How do we? You can frighten them all you like about stories about hidden masses of fat in their abdomen, or being in, and you can tell them how good they are. But how do we encourage people to get out of the car? I mean, is there some strategy that we can use apart from, I don't know, threatening?
Well, what we know about physical activity messaging, but the others can speak from their expertise in a second, I'm sure, is that the positive messages are the thing. So saying to people, you're at greater risk of heart disease if you keep driving your car because you're too sedentary and not active, isn't the message that appeals to people. What appeals to people is the mental health benefits. Doing a little bit of walking as part of your journey could make you feel better. So short-term and immediate benefits are what appeals in terms of physical activity. I do think that adding the issue of being wedded to your car is a tricky thing because people use that for self-esteem and for different reasons than we might be talking about and trying to get them more active. So I think that's a pretty tricky thing. But a prime example would be the school run. Now, many schools have now adopted a zone round their school where cars cannot stop because, in fact, that was the greatest scene of child accidents where cars parked and they pulled out quickly and kids were... So schools have stopped that for safety, but it creates activity and kids are dropped off and maybe walk together in a class to the school.
Yeah, they're dropped off on the zone just at the edge of the activity.
Yeah.
And at that zone there. and the activity you usually see are 4x4 yummy mummies punching each other. So you have. I've got a couple of I've got some questions here. That, I'm going to start with Hazel, and this is a really interesting question because we're all talking about activity and moving. And Hazel says, if you're still at a desk all day, how bad is it for you?
Well, Will's got to be the person to answer that question.
Just
I think
sitting there.
Nanette may know more than I do, but I think the evidence is that simply sitting for prolonged periods is not good for your health. You've seen standing desks and things like that, and some people adopt those, or even just breaking up your day, especially if we're all working from home. You don't even have a commute to walk to your car or to walk anywhere nowadays, so that's a big issue. So just trying to break up your day. And certainly what you spoke about with the mental health benefits, you know, if I'm working at home all day, if I go for a 10-minute walk at lunchtime, it's nice to be outside. Might not be nice in the winter when it's dark and freezing, but it's still nicer than being inside all day. Yeah. So I think you need to break up periods of sitting and just trying to do something to remind yourself to get up.
Yeah.
And I think the lockdown has shown that, really. You know, everybody is tired of the Teams meetings and really desperate to get outside. And people really have started thinking, well, actually, just a 10-minute walk, just a few laps of the garden to annoy your neighbour. You know, that's
Do
something.
change out of your jammies. I always think that's a good idea. You really don't want to be frightening them like that. I remember when the first announcements were made, remember they said that we could go out for an hour a day to exercise, and most Scots went, an hour every day? What? And there's another question. This is from Lachlan, who's 7. Hey, Lachlan, it's a great question. He wants to know if you get fat cells in your brain, can you see them on the MRI scanner?
You don't have fat cells in your brain, but your brain is actually quite lipid rich, so it might show up being a bit brighter in your MRI
What's
scan.
lipid?
Lipid is fat. So yeah, so it's got quite a high fat content anyway.
Your brain's fat?
It can be quite fatty, yeah. But we store fat in all sorts of interesting places. Something I focus on is within bone marrow, which is producing all your blood cells, and we think the fat there might be doing some interesting things. You have fat that can regulate sort of immune and support immune system function. So fat is there to store your calories and to release them if you're eating less. But it also produces hormones and does many things that can control fertility. You see, for example, it controls female fertility. So we're going off tangent here. But if you have like a female athlete who gets very thin, you might stop the reproductive function. So fat's doing all sorts of things, and it gets stored in lots of interesting places.
This fat, would it store yuck that you're breathing in?
It could do. It could do. And I think this is one of the things we've seen, certainly in the research that I do, actually, is people are becoming aware of the fact that the air pollution doesn't go into your lungs, it actually starts to get elsewhere in your body. So if we talk about the tiny particles I was talking about, you know, they're so small, smaller than viruses, these can actually get into your blood, so they cross into the blood vessels of the lung, and then after that they can be carried all around the body. And actually, I think there is a sort of evidence that some of the air pollutants that we breathe might start to accumulate in fat. And people have started to do that now. They have started to link air pollution with, well, many diseases, but diabetes is certainly one of them.
So it's another sneaky little place that the stuff that we're breathing in can be stored inside our bodies is in the fat, that if we've got it all packed into the abdomen. But there is a problem, you see, with active travel. Nanette, and it's that people don't have time. I mean, we live very, very, very busy lives, and even a 10-minute stroll sometimes, especially if you're a young mum out there, a working mum, and you've a lot on your plate. I mean, where do you make the time?
Well, you make the time because in cities, 1 to 2 kilometres is done faster on your feet or on a bike than in a vehicle in cities. So we waste time sometimes by driving, especially if you're in Glasgow's blue zone right now. You can't go anywhere, you're sitting in a traffic jam. But we waste time sometimes by driving. And so you can save it by parking a little bit further away, getting your couple of minutes in that way, just making it part of your everyday life, not having to put aside a lot of time to do it, but accumulating it over the day. Being active regularly, taking breaks from sitting, as Will said, is a really important strategy. Otherwise, our metabolism is pretty well shut down if we sit all day. And it takes a lot of activity to attenuate against that. So you've got to take breaks. So I'm a real keen promoter of everyday activity, not necessarily something you have to go to a special facility with special clothes, with special skills to do and devote a lot of time to it. So 5 to 10 minutes, I think most people can find that here and there as they go about their day to get some activity in. Walking up the stairs, for example, in this particular studio, that was hard work, and that took 3 minutes.
And most people in Scotland, it's only 5 minutes walk to the nearest pub, so you know,
well,
we can all enjoy exercise.
Social activity, yeah.
And now I get screams of complaint from the liver specialists. So
Well, we've lost the French. I'm Marks and Spencer's. Let's go for the liver people.
I didn't slag off Marks and Spencer's. They've got a very good frozen food aisle. It's just that people want to park in it because people like their cars, because people are separate from other people in their cars. That's what they like about it. That you said yourself, it's not really always about the journey. It's about what you're in that people quite like. But people are also frightened of exercise. Now, that might sound like a sort of strange thing to say, but you know, there's so many warnings about, you know, if you don't exercise, I think people just give up. That's one of the problems that people have.
I think a problem is framing everything as exercise, and it's as though this is some separate thing that's a separate activity in your life. And especially with obesity, it's almost like exercise is a punishment for what you've eaten, and it's viewed in that way. But it's not just about obesity, it's about health overall. And you don't have to think, oh, if I'm walking to the shop, that's exercise. It's just part of your day, and it's just you moving, and it should just be a natural thing.
Are you fond of these buzzy thingies? What do you call them? Fitty bitty thingies?
I've got one on here that tells me how far I walk. I didn't get it for that reason, but now I look at my steps and think, oh, I need to do more. But
All right.
Your heart rate.
Oh, you mean the 10,000 step thing?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you get to the end of the day and you realise it's 9,919 something,
Oh,
and
you've got to
you
walk around
the
your living room.
Yeah, doing the zombie walk.
Well, let me try and debunk that a little bit. 10,000 was just a lovely little phrase that in Japanese was a great advertising motto. And so there's no real health evidence for the 10,000. It spreads from about 7,500. As soon as you've done that, you'll be getting benefits from the steps you've taken, up to maybe 12,000, depending on your habitual activity. So the 10,000, aspiring to it and doing 500 less or 500 more will have almost no difference in a day, but regularly done, 7 to 12,000 steps, going about your daily life, getting these breaks, taking little chances to be active, using the stairs, that all accumulates. Dog walking, fantastic method of getting regular physical activity.
See, I've got a cat. And there is no
Cat
way
walking.
that cat is...
Cat walking.
There's no such... There's a
Fantastic
reason
method.
why there's no such thing as cat walking in it, I'm telling you. OK, there's a really interesting question that's coming. Is cycling next to diesel cars worse for you than driving a car?
Oh, that's a terrible
this might come
question,
up.
isn't it? Yes, yeah.
Right.
It's hard to say for definite. Now, the things that make it difficult to say are that, well, one, you're breathing more. I think I mentioned that earlier on. So you're breathing much faster if you're exercising. So if you're doing that next to a diesel car, you might be breathing in more exercise as well. But I think most of the research, and Nanette may tell you later on, saying actually the benefits of the exercise completely offset the bad effects of the air pollution, unless you're, for example, cycling in Beijing city centre for 8 hours a day.
Right.
Generally, the exercise is going to benefit you.
So you'd rather people exercise?
That's right, and there's choices to be made as well. Now, if you're cycling as opposed to being in a car, you've got choices to whether you cycle next to that diesel car or cycle through the quiet streets or
Cycle on the pavement.
running people over. Yes.
For cycling cycle lanes, and you know, in the Netherlands, Denmark retrofitted their cities after the war, and they have separated pedestrian, cycle and car routes. And so even moving 2 metres away, 1 metre from the diesel engine, you really seriously decrease the risk of the pollution.
Only a metre?
Yep, not very far. Well, he's the expert, but not very far.
Just like with COVID.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's exactly like that because it's smaller than
It's what you're
viruses,
breathing
he
in,
told
yeah,
us. So that approach to city infrastructure would help hugely as well to keep people feeling safe when they're walking or cycling. But I want to come back to you, Mark, because isn't it true that driving your car, you're breathing in the exhaust fumes from the car in front of you? And so it's absolutely worse. You're sitting still and you're getting the pollution.
Absolutely, and I was waiting for the dreadful question, how do you get the ethics to do these terrible experiments as well? Well, you know, in that box that we have there,
Yeah.
as I said, we've tried to set the diesel exhaust, and it's higher than you would be, for example, cycling in London city centre, but it has to be something that is close to real world levels. Now, if you think of your car, what happens in your car? You have your windows rolled up, and you're queuing in traffic with the exhaust of the car coming out of the bottom of the car in front, and it comes straight into the air vents of your car. So it starts to come in your car, your windows are closed, and it recycles in the car. So actually the air pollution in your car can actually get to anywhere from like 5 to 10 times higher than what it would be if you're on the road next to the car.
So you're in a box of pollution.
Exactly. So we can do these experiments within an exposure chamber, because when you're driving in your car, you're in your own little exposure chamber, breathing in the diesel exhaust.
So if you're breathing that in, so if you're singing along to, say, Meatloaf or something, and there's a big note in that, so you have to, so actually you're taking even more yuck into your lungs.
That's right as well. But you're a lost cause if you're listening to Meatloaf.
We're going to have to agree to disagree on that one.
If you're walking or cycling as well, you're less likely to be sitting at a standstill, because you're not at the mercy of traffic so much.
Yeah. Okay. So got some questions here. So this is a really the kind of question that I do hear quite a lot of people arguing about. Is it as good for you doing a few 5-minute walks as walking for the same length of time but all at once?
Yes. Simply put, the evidence suggests that there's no need to do a huge amount, that if you add it up by small amounts, you get the exact same health benefits. Indeed, the mental health benefits might be even greater from taking these shorter breaks.
So you don't have to plan these huge, big, long... You just, every now and again, every hour on your 10-minute walk, 5-minute walk,
That would work if you can work that in, or 5 minutes even. That we've taken away the idea that you need to do a particular bout of activity to get a benefit. The evidence doesn't show that anymore. We can break it right down to little small segments, add it all up, and you'll get the same benefit.
Okay, now there's a new player on the block when it comes to wheels, if you know what I mean, and it's the electric bike. Somebody has asked, this is from Neil, how does one reconcile the mental health effect of guilt when cycling an electric bike with the physical health benefits of being outside on it in the first place?
I don't think there's any guilt involved in an electric bike, and I say that because I've
charge
got
it,
one myself, really. But no, the evidence from electric bikes is that you do a moderate level of activity.
Right.
So whatever you're feeling about being guilty or cheating, relax with that, because you're still doing the same amount of activity as you would do, certainly for walking. And it makes your journey more possible. Like, I particularly feel the cobble streets of Edinburgh are easier. And that would have put me off on a regular bike. Now I can do it on my electric bikes. There's many benefits, particularly as people get older, to an electric bike assisting you to keep outside. And you've got all the benefits of being in the fresh air and possibly going through nice green environments. So no guilt with that, I would say.
No guilt. And just give in to the smug, is what I say. And
not the smog, but the smug.
smug.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but people who've been to the gym or you know, emanate an air of smug. Like, I'm fit, I've been to the gym, and I know, because I do go to the gym, which is very embarrassing. Here's another question. If you have pollution in your fat cells, if you lose weight, what happens to the pollution? Does it leave your body, or is there any chance that it could concentrate?
I don't know. I think there's been similar things about like the compounds you get in plastics that they've banned from lots of plastics that might accumulate in your fat tissue as well. I'm just waffling here because I actually don't know. But I think if you were to lose the fat, a lot of these things might dissolve in the fat.
Right.
And so then if you're burning that fat, there'd be nothing for them to dissolve in. You'd probably excrete them.
So I think there's ways that the body can get rid of air pollution. So as I mentioned before, we did some work. I'm just trying to show that these very small particles get into the blood. Now these were experiments that caused us a huge headache because it's really difficult to measure these particles.
Yeah.
So we had to try and turn to an alternative, and we actually used gold nanoparticles because we're very rich in the University of Edinburgh.
Gold?
But the reason for that is, firstly, you can get it in sizes about the same size as a diesel exhaust particle. Secondly, it's not harmful, so it's pretty inert. You can breathe in a lot of it without causing problems. And also, you've got very specialised ways that you can measure it in the body that you couldn't do for a diesel exhaust particle. So actually, when we did experiments and we asked people to breathe in these tiny gold particles, we could start to see it appearing in the blood. But also we can start to see it appearing in the pee, in the urine afterwards. So the body can get rid of it once it gets in the blood by peeing it out. The bad sign for that, though, is it doesn't do that with all particle sizes. And in fact, where else does it go in the body if it's not being peed out? So we mentioned it going to fats, and we were talking about fats in other areas of the body. So one of the major reasons of heart disease is you start to have fats build up in the inside of your body. So we've all got this, even from birth we have this to some extent, and we have these fatty plaques that build up in our arteries over time, and they grow into the blood vessel and it disturbs the blood flow. And when you have this in your heart and these plaques break open, that causes a blood clot, and that's when you have a heart attack. If it happens in the brain, that's when you have a stroke. And our work with the gold nanoparticles showed that actually these particles don't just get into the blood, but they actually start to build up in the sort of fatty areas of the plaques. In fact, they're more likely to build up in the fatty areas of the plaques than other places. And even with patients who had had stroke, and we were lucky enough to be able to recruit a few patients who had stroke to breathe in some gold particles the day before they had surgery to try and help with the stroke. We took out the piece of diseased tissue that was there, that was removed to help restore the blood flow, and you can actually measure little bits of gold in that there. So it's almost as if these particles are almost designed to go to the areas of the body that cause the most harm.
Oh, good. But you kind of flush it out. You flush the gold was flushed out in your pee.
You can do some, you can get rid of some of the gold, but it tends to be what you can actually pee out tends to be the really, really small particles.
Okay.
And what gets into the blood is sort of like the medium-sized particles. So there is then the problem that you have all these medium-sized particles that can't go out in the pee.
Okay.
And what happens to them? You know, imagine what
Right.
they're doing to the kidney as it gets all golden.
Rather than gold urine, which is going to be the follow-up for the next Goldfinger Bond film. It's going to be wonderful. Here's a really interesting question, because it does relate to the climate and the cities that we live in. Are people who live in cities more or less active than people who live rurally?
People that live in cities have more access to everyday activity like we're talking about here for walking and cycling. People that live rurally cannot get that 15-minute neighbourhood quite so easily, but they are active in different ways. So in Scotland, we don't see much difference between city dwelling and rural dwelling activity levels, but people are doing it in different ways.
So that the activity levels are roughly the same.
Yeah,
Don't
not
forget-
much regional difference in Scotland.
And so in Scotland, what was it like with London?
Well, London's a very walkable city.
That's
You know,
true.
It's constructed on that grid basis, and people, as in New York, walk grids or miles quite easily to get about. And very few people in that part of London will own cars even. They take public transport and they do walk about. So there will be a high level of that kind of activity in cities like London.
So there's a question, by the way, if you've got a question, don't forget, put it on the chat box on YouTube and we'll fling it into the panel. Would a 20-minute city make it better for people to be more active?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of
Is
its
that what you've
main
seen
points.
when
I
they
think
do
it's
it?
the main points to make smaller neighbourhoods sustainable for economy, for everyday activities like schooling, medical attention, religion, all within that area. So we don't need to use cars so much. We can walk or cycle or wheel to most venues, and therefore activity happens very naturally in our everyday life. So it's a bonus for economy, for our community, and for our activity.
Many of Scotland's cities are 20-minute cities. I think Edinburgh is quite walkable. Really
It
quickly.
is.
It's very
It
walkable.
is.
And I suppose one reason why people in a city might have relied on a car would be to go and drive and do a weekly grocery shop, but people now are more reliant or more aware of having grocery deliveries. I mean, COVID's helped with that as well.
Yeah.
I wonder how that affects
Yeah,
things.
I think that possibly works in the opposite direction if you're not going out even
Maybe
to,
not walking
to
around the shop, yeah,
You're just
maybe.
sitting at home.
You're
Well, it's- yeah.
losing some
Yes, waiting for
activity.
Waitrose.
Yeah.
Actually, it's farm foods, but I won't admit that publicly. Right, this is a really this chewy question. Thanks for this, Brendan. Great question. Given the particulates obesity, being killed or maimed, resource and manufacturing emissions, space taken, and the encouragement to immobility. Can mass car ownership be compatible with a healthy world? Do we start rationing the cars that we've got? Are we allowed one each?
I mean, this is perhaps your more experience. I would say I think it seems like there's a cultural shift, particularly among younger people, where there's less of an onus on having to have a car. It's not so much. Maybe there'll be more of a perception that of the damage of having a car, even electric cars, and so it will be less culturally acceptable for everyone to have a car. Probably, I don't know what the rates of car ownership are per person in the UK, but if that's falling.
But would you like to see? So basically, well, the government doesn't really take any stance on car ownership, as far as I can see. But would you like to see an active campaign to lower the levels of obesity by encouraging people not to have cars?
I don't know. I think it's more about cars will always have their place because there's always going to be somewhere, but maybe not your own car. If we go to autonomous vehicles, you won't need a car. The majority of cars in a city are sitting parked somewhere or are looking to park. They're not actually partaking in a useful journey, I think. So we don't need to own a car most of the time. We pay all this money and this insurance and this tax for it just to sit there and rust and to become obsolete. So if people can accept that perhaps we can just share cars, and if they are readily available for hire, and especially if you're not driving, if they're just autonomous vehicles, I think the idea is that would massively decrease the demand for the overall car vehicles in the world, which would be good from a manufacturing perspective as well, the environmental costs there.
Just before I bring in Nanette about improving physical activity, the emissions, the manufacture, everything really that goes into that box on wheels is dangerous. So is it time that we ended our love affair with the car?
Well, I think that's difficult to say. And as we had the video from Tarek earlier on, I think things are changing. And certainly there are people who want to sell down electric vehicles as being the solution. What we have to bear in mind is they're part of the solution, or they're a stepping stone to better solutions. And I think Nanette's main point there is that, and Will said it as well, everyone will probably need a car for some reason or other. And I think one of the things that people can do is just try and use the car a little bit less. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be walking from London to Inverness, but one of the key things everyone can do is perhaps just walk the children or shout at the children down to school instead of just driving them to school. It's these very small journeys that take 1 to less than 10 minutes. Just have a think and just do it. And the incentives are there, as we've all heard. You'll see the benefits from those in your health. Yes,
you will see the benefits. If we can winkle people out of the car, and it's not easy because people do like them, Nanette.
They do, yeah.
And I particularly I just like the sound of turning it up quite loud in my car. I'll just sit outside and turn it up just like that. But people do like their cars, and
they need them. People need their cars for certain things. It's just a question of where could you not need it so much? Could you make your contribution by not driving so much, by deciding to walk to the shops, by deciding to go on the school run a different way and give some aspect of that journey to activity? We can't fight against our move towards a car culture. Car manufacturers have huge advertising budgets.
Oh, yeah.
Physical activity has no advertising budget because we're not a product in that sense. So these are difficult things to oppose each other with. People need cars. What we're saying is just making some of your travelling more active is good for us and the planet. And I think the climate crisis has created, mass market for electric cars, even although the infrastructure isn't quite there yet for plugs everywhere. People want them. And so there's car sharing schemes, and I think the youngsters have got this message much more than my generation, that you don't need to own a car. I was in Vancouver for a short study break last year, just before, in fact, COVID hit us all, and I was amazed at how many car sharing schemes there were. Hardly anyone owned a car. They didn't own them. They said, right, we'll book that, we'll book this, we'll get that, we'll get there. So the same vehicles were used by like 10 different households in the course of a day. So fewer vehicles on the road, and a much more efficient method. You don't tax it, you don't have to worry about its mechanics. It was very impressive. We're not at that level yet in Edinburgh or Glasgow or Scotland.
So you're looking for mindful car ownership, mindful car use.
That's a nice way of putting it. I think so.
That's going to be on the side of a bus.
We'll get rid of the buses though.
Oh, see that! I just come up with an advertising slogan. You get rid of the buses. So it's a more thoughtful approach to your use of the car.
I think so.
Because the car used to be an aspirational thing. People wanted it, but in
Indeed,
fact, it's
yeah.
turned out to be it's almost as well from what you've said. It's almost as deadly as cigarettes.
There's certainly similarities. Yeah, there's similarities with what comes out of your exhaust and you know, your self-imposed air pollution that you smoke there. Yes, and actually some of the effects that you see when we do these studies and we expose people to diesel exhaust, actually some of the effects it's having on our body are not that far different than it would be if you were a lifelong smoker. But there's differences as well, but certainly.
And the same's true for inactivity. The global evidence, not just Scottish, but the global evidence is that as many deaths are caused by inactivity as are caused by smoking. Now that isn't a commonly known thing. Most people will understand how dangerous smoking is because we've had 50 years of campaigning against smoking, culminating quite recently in the policies of not smoking in public places. And we've had maybe 2 decades of saying, oh, activity is good for you, and we're still building that up. But there are as many deaths around the world from inactivity as from smoking. It is about 5 million, and that's global evidence.
So, I was just going to say, if I could add to that as well, we know that, you know, actually change can actually have benefits. So when you look at the smoking ban, and that wasn't popular by any means.
Yep.
It now seems acceptable, but it wasn't certainly popular at the time. And people have done the studies and they've shown that because we have this ban on indoor smoking, the levels of heart disease in Scotland have reduced about 20 to 25%. So could the same thing happen if we get rid of air pollution?
And then people accept it. And so you say people are addicted to their cars and there will be resistance to change. But once the change is implemented, quite often people buy into it. It coincides with cultural change as well. And once that change happens, people are more inclined to go along with it.
I think taking on a popular decision that pans out is an amazing thing to watch, and especially with the smoking ban, it certainly was. I remember people going, "Oh, I'm not doing it. I'll just smoke what I like." And the smoking ban came in, everybody just went outside, and it was just amazing. But there's a comment from Brendan again. Thanks very much, Brendan. Bike owners get more exercise than conventional bike owners. Electric bike owners, e-bike owners get more exercise than conventional bike owners since they use them for far more journeys.
They do. The average journey time on an e-bike is longer than a regular bike, and so people are able to do longer journeys. So there's no reason to think that an e-bike is cheating or you're not getting sufficient activity. You do your biking slightly differently when you have an e-bike. And you know, you look at Netherlands, they have a hugely high rate of e-bike usage, and they're flat as a pancake.
Yeah.
So people commute, 15 kilometres. You can't really do that efficiently with an ordinary bike. They have cargo bikes. They've stopped using their car to go shopping. They have a cargo bike and everything goes in it, including the kids, the dogs, your shopping. And they're moving around with that with ease.
It's flat.
And it's flat.
It's flat.
It's flat.
It's flat.
Yeah.
Edinburgh is not flat. It does this.
And that's why e-bikes are very good.
And it's got cobbles.
Yeah. And you can rent them from the city stands. You know,
It's
you can
a
get
cobble thing as well. That does, because I mean, it's a great way to impersonate Shirley Bassey. Those riding a bike over cobbles and singing. Finger. It's great. So we could go on all evening about this, but we do have to wrap up shortly. But it seems to me that there are 3 separate strands, but they're all united by one thing, and that's the car. So the obesity, as people are getting more in and active, people need to be more physically active, and you've discovered that this car is spewing out all kinds of unpleasant things into the atmosphere. So if you had just one thing that you would, you were talking about mindful car ownership.
I like that phrase.
It's mine though.
Yeah,
Nanette, I said
it. You can copyright that, and we'll use it everywhere.
We're still getting that on a t-shirt.
Mindful car. I'm a mindful car user.
A mindful car user. So is that the way ahead? We should become mindful car users?
I would like to promote that.
Right, let's do that. So this means that what we need obviously is an advertising budget of it's a couple of billion. But if you did have one thing, what would you say if it wasn't don't breathe round cars?
Well, I think that's true. I think we need to start making the move, and I think as with climate change, where there's a matter of urgency, I would like to see the same thing about physical exercise and air pollution. when we're all worried about COVID and there's many, many deaths, and we look at the deaths that are due to air pollution. So that is at 36,000 in the UK every year. Okay, that's not as much as COVID, but this happens year on, year on, year out, all the time. This all builds up. And so a little bit of urgency is needed. And I do like the approach of saying, instead of just saying, this is bad for you, try to sort of encourage people to do this with incentives as well. So if the government hands out free electric cars, I will certainly take one.
Also, that's your T-shirt, free electric car.
Yes, please.
Free electric car, mindful car. Just move more, eat less. What would you like us to do?
Well, I'd say that exercise isn't just about, or even primarily about, weight loss. It's about health overall. And exercise doesn't necessarily work that well for weight loss by itself. You need to combine it with diet. But I think if people are exercising more, hoping just to lose weight, don't be discouraged if you've stopped losing weight. It still is having major health benefits. But also, maybe to have a second point, exercise isn't just this separate part of your life. It's integrated in your life through just the activity you do. It doesn't have to be seen to be this separate activity. And just even if you feel busy in your life, taking that time out to do a bit of exercise, it's like having more sleep. You might say, I'm too busy, I need to stay up and do this work. But getting more sleep, getting more exercise, it'll put you in a better mindset to do better in the other time that you do have available. So you should always make some time for it.
Yeah.
And if we bring all of this together, obviously this can only help with the climate emergency that we're in right now.
Yep.
Because we're going to have to run fast when the glaciers come after us, Nanette.
Fortunately, you don't have to run too fast for that because they're moving slowly, but you'd have to move. So a little bit of activity means a lot, is what I would say at the end point.
That's another fantastic slogan to put on a T-shirt. And I think at that point, what we should all do now is probably just walk to the nearest pub. Which,
Good.
she said that, not me. Which is good. And I think we've come to the end of Changing World Conversations with the University of Edinburgh. It's been an absolute rollercoaster and eye-opening and thought-provoking series. I'm glad that you could join us this evening, and you never know, we might be back. But in the meantime, remember, look at your car. Do you really need to take that journey? Let's get all World War II on them. That's what I say. And let's be mindful car owners, and let's get out and exercise a little bit more, even just for the good of our mental health. Thank you very much for joining us, and good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.